I went back to Berkeley, and I decided to join in January, and then in March I was initiated. So that was the next time I was able to see Srila Prabhupada at the same temple in La Cienega. That was 1970 in March, and the initiation was very interesting. What happened was there were a number of devotees being initiated. The devotee on my right, who was initiated as Paramatma, used to smoke cigarettes. The devotee on my left, who was initiated as Babrubahan, used to take a lot of LSD. So when it came time for them to recite the four regulative principles, they would recite them, and then Paramatma on my right, Prabhupada, after he recited the regulative principles, Prabhupada went like this. And he said, "What about smoking?" And he said, "Oh no, Prabhupada." So then I recited the regulative principles. Prabhupada gave me my name. He said, "Mahatma is one who's always chanting the glories of the Lord." He didn't say anything else. Then it came time for Babrubahan. He recited the four regulative principles, and Prabhupada said, "What about LSD?" And he, of course, said, "Oh no, Prabhupada." So it's funny, they don't remember that. I distinctly remember that to this day. I don't know if the temple presidents told Prabhupada that they had those habits, or if Prabhupada knew it. Generally, we assume that he just knew. But I thought that was amazing that he made those remarks. And he was kind of laughing and smiling and pretending like he was smoking.
And he said that, "What's your name?" I said, "Prabhupada, my name is Yogendra Kumar Sharma." He said, "From today onward, you're no more Yogendra Kumar Sharma. From today onward, you're Nav Yogendra Das." Practically, first meeting, he gave me the initiation. So I was very happy. So I felt very happy. I said, "Prabhupada, when I was young and I had my horoscope done, and in my horoscope it is mentioned that I am very fortunate. If I'll go to the material world, then I will make a lot of money, but I'm not going to go to the material world. And my luck is very good, I'm very fortunate." Prabhupada paused for some time, and then he looked at me. Said, "That's why you have come to me. You're fortunate, that's why you have come to me." It's true that I have come to Prabhupada. It is my good fortune.
I remember as we were walking through from that part where he got off the plane to the exit of the airport, we were walking, and Prabhupada stopped to tell Sri Govinda, who at the time had his tilak all the way back. It was just all the way back like this, and he stopped. He said, "This is not a racing stripe. This is tilak. It stops at the forehead." So that was the first instruction that I knew for sure, that how to put tilak on, And as we were walking, it was very great that somehow or another it was arranged so that I could be right there in the very front as Prabhupada was coming and watching him dancing in front of him. And I could see the direction he was heading for. He was heading to a door that was an entrance door. It didn't, like if he stepped on the carpet there, it wasn't going to open. It was for the entrance. So I could see that that was the case. So I ran ahead and pulled the door open for him. And when Prabhupada walked by, he said, "Thank you," And here I am, Bhakta Butterfly, and I'm just like, God, it was like the greatest thing in the world. He actually said something to me, And then everybody else all staunch and all, of course, very fixed up, everybody, those days. And then that was it until we got back to the temple. And that was also my initiation time, also the very next day. And the Radha Damodar bus was there, so there was a lot of devotees being initiated that day. And prior to this date, about a month before, the publication of what was that book? The Nectar of Instruction, come out, and the announcement of the Radha Kund, had now for the first time reached the world. No, it was just in the last month that people has actually heard of the Radha Kund. So as the devotees were being initiated and being called up to get their beads, there was a lot of errors. There was a lot of devotees, like when they would, pay directly their obeisances to Srila Prabhupada straight ahead, their rear ends would be at Kishore Kishore. And Prabhupada would try to tell them to move, but they were so you know, this is the Lord himself in this wonderful form of Srila Prabhupada, you know. This was the flavor we were all tasting. As far as I was concerned, it was how I felt, you know. And they'd reach with their left hand to get their beads, and sometimes one devotee, I remember, he said, so what are the principles? And he said, well, don't eat after dark, or something like this, you know. Everyone was so nervous and so ecstatically discombobulated. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to present themselves. So I'm watching, you know, pay your obeisances to the side, you know, and reach with my right hand, 4 regular principles, 16 rounds. Okay, I've got this, you know, I'm going to do this right, you know. So I'm walking, and then when I'm called up, you know, I'm walking, and I'm 4 regular principles, 16 rounds, you know, the right side, right hand, you know, and I'm making sure I remember all these things, you know. So when I walk up there, I was so intent to say these things to Srila Prabhupada that Prabhupada picked that up. And he knew that I was anxious to tell him everything. And so he sat there looking at me, and I'm sitting there waiting for him to ask me. And he's sitting there waiting for me to tell him. And I'm sitting there waiting for him to ask me. Finally, he smiled and he kind of a little chuckle, you know. He says, so what are the regulated principles, you know? And I mentioned to him them, and then the 16 rounds. And he took my beads from the microphone stand. He's looking at me for a minute. And first, there's always been the smile. From the very beginning, he had this little grin. Then he gets real sober for a minute, and he goes, your name is Radha Kund, like this with his eyes, you know. The whole room, it was like 4th of July or something. Ooh, ah, jai, whoa, you know, it was like this, you know, 500 devotees going off, you know, because we just heard about it. So that was my very first actual association with his divine grace.
So we were sitting there next to the cooker. At that point, we had just two, those gas Indian burners had 2 flames in the gas bottle, and we would make a bucket of coal fire to do his chapatis, because they would come out better on that. Sat down, had the tiffin with all the spices and all the vegetables. Prabhupada sat down. In the meantime, he just kept casually talking to Bhagaji in Hindi. And so I had the tiffin. He put the spice in, this spice in, that spice in, then this vegetable in, this vegetable in. And he looked at Bhagaji and he said, so simple, still they cannot do. And then we just sat there, and he was chatting with Bhagaji. And so as he was chatting, Palika was concerned that it was too hot. So she would turn the burner down, and he would, you know, chat, and he'd look and probably turn it back up. Didn't say anything, and chat. And then 3 minutes went by, and Palika would turn it down again. And this happened 3 times. And he turned it down. He goes, Hari Baba, why are you messing? So, you know, we kind of just stood back, and then he looked at Bhagaji and he said, these 2 burners, he said, I can make, he said, in 45 minutes, I can make full prasad for 100 people. Bhagaji looked and said, impossible. And Prabhupada said, I will bet you, and Bhagaji said, yeah, khichdi. And Prabhupada said, no, full prasad in 45 minutes. And they started speaking in Hindi then again. And Bhagaji said, impossible. And Prabhupada said, I will bet you 1 lakh of rupees. And Bhagaji started to laugh, and he said, Prabhupada, if I win or lose, you will take it anyway. And then he started to laugh, and then he just stood up without another word and said, it's finished. And then he walked out, and the kind of energy just went right back with him, right out the door. So that was my first time, him coming into the kitchen and cutting up and speaking.
So on this particular morning walk, Prabhupada was walking, and generally Paramahansa, Swami at the time, and Sruti or Amoga Prabhu would play the devil's advocate and pose materialistic questions to the philosophy that Srila Prabhupada was presenting, or inquiries. So I was becoming a little more familiar with Srila Prabhupada at this time, and I felt familiar in the sense that I felt comfortable, that I felt that I could also ask a question, and I wouldn't get, you know, a bolt of lightning wouldn't come down and kill me for asking a question. So, Prabhupada was talking about Bhagavad Gita, and different devotees had asked questions. So I asked Prabhupada a question. I said I was trying to, myself, imitate a materialist. And I said, but if you say that the Bhagavad Gita is 5,000 years old, then what does it mean? And Prabhupada immediately again stopped me in mid-sentence. And Prabhupada turned to me and said, he is my disciple, he does not know Bhagavad Gita. And then he turned to the other devotees and looked at them. And so I didn't know what to say. I couldn't even get my question out. No one knew where Prabhupada was coming from. And then one of the devotees tried to half come to my defense. I think it was a Mogu. And he said, well, Prabhupada, I think he was pretending to be a materialist. And Prabhupada stopped him in the mid-sentence. He said, that is all right. He is my disciple. He does not know Bhagavad Gita. What is the meaning of this? And he looked at them all, and he kept on going. And I wanted to disappear. I wanted to melt. I couldn't understand why Prabhupada was chastising me, and he was so heavy. And he kept on saying, he is my disciple. He does not know Bhagavad Gita. And then Prabhupada began to explain, and he talked, and we walked further on. But I don't know what else happened on that walk. I was just blown away. I wanted to disappear. I just didn't want to be there anymore. Prabhupada's anger was so vehement. And it was basically, I guess, the first time that I had actually experienced Prabhupada's anger personally. Later on, I realized, and Prabhupada had been explaining, that if I was a materialist and I had picked up the Bhagavad Gita and I had been reading through it, then I should have known that Krishna, right there in the Bhagavad Gita, says that he spoke this science to the sun god many millions of years ago. So right there in that chapter, Krishna is explaining that this knowledge is actually eternal and it was spoken many millions of years ago. So as a materialist, it was a stupid, stupid question. How could I say that it was 5,000 years old? I must have read that somewhere, but if I had read that, then I should have read also that it was millions of years old. And from the devotional point of view, of course, I should have known that the knowledge was eternal, and it was a silly question. So there was no escape for me, and obviously Prabhupada was correct. He is my disciple, he does not know Bhagavad Gita. So I took it to heart later on to learn Bhagavad Gita and to try and get the knowledge of Krishna consciousness down. Actually, Prabhupada wrote me a nice letter a number of months later saying that I had actually understood the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, so I felt somewhat relieved at that time. But that was an incredible experience to feel Prabhupada's anger right then and there on you. Just blew me away.
The nice thing about being temple president in the early days is we were supposed to write Prabhupada a letter every month. We were supposed to tell him what was going on in our center, and then I could take advantage and ask questions. So one time we were doing traveling Sankirtan, and I was enjoying traveling and preaching. I didn't like to manage, so when I came back to the temple, I was experiencing all this anxiety. So I began thinking that on the road, I can remember Krishna. But when I'm at the temple, I just forget him. There's so many things to do. So I decided when I would give my report to Srila Prabhupada that I would ask a question. So I was thinking like this. I was thinking, is it better to do less service and think of Krishna more, or do more service and think of Krishna less? So those were my two options, although that's not the actual philosophy. So I wrote Prabhupada that letter. What should I do? Because I told him how when I was traveling it was so much easier to think of Krishna. So then he replied, his first sentence was, the whole point of everything is to become absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. So when I heard Prabhupada say that, I felt guilty, I felt embarrassed, I felt this was impossible, to become absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, because I felt I was never thinking of Krishna. That's why I wrote Prabhupada, thinking of so many things other than Krishna. So he writes back, the whole point of everything is to become absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. So I was, immediately I was thinking, this is impossible, I'm already at a loss. So then Prabhupada said, the way you do this is that you think that you have no qualification for your service. So Prabhupada told me in my situation, you should think that you have no qualification to be the temple president, and that you have to pray to Krishna to give you the qualification. So he said, you should think Krishna, you should pray, Krishna, please give me the qualification, because if you don't give me the qualification, then all the devotees in the temple will leave. So he said, in that way, always remain dependent on Krishna, and then you'll always be able to think of Krishna. So he didn't say, do less service, think of Krishna more. That was never Prabhupada's mood. But his mood was, you should be dependent. And then by being dependent, you'll think of Krishna. So I thought that was very instructive.
So one particular evening he called me. He said, come and give me massage. So I was massaging Srila Prabhupada. And now he said that it was around about 9:30, 9:45. I said, now you can go and take rest. It was in his quarter in upstairs, Vrindavan. And I was preparing my bed in front of Prabhupada's quarter upstairs. It was summertime. The mosquitoes in Vrindavan. So I was putting on my mosquito net. It took me about 15 to 20 minutes to prepare my bed. And it was about 10 o'clock. And what I found inside Prabhupada's room, there's a noise. I looked from the window. I said, Prabhupada is supposed to be taking rest now. I looked from the window. What I found, Prabhupada is sitting on desk and translating. And from 10 till morning, Prabhupada kept on translating. No rest practically. And for some reason, Prabhupada called me in. I said, Prabhupada, this night you didn't take any rest. And you're not feeling well even. You should have taken some rest, Prabhupada. Prabhupada looked at me and he said that, Navi Yogendra, sometime this body will be sick, sometime it will be okay. But in any condition, you should keep on serving Krishna. That is to your eternal credit. That is only going to go with you, nothing else. See how much he is thinking of serving Krishna. How much is dedicated to his Lord Krishna. He is not feeling well, in advanced age. But he is not sleeping. What for he is doing? He is not doing this like many people work very hard to make money. He is doing for the welfare of everyone. He is doing for the benefit of everyone. For the benefit of mankind. So then he said that actually this body is useless. This body is useless. And after the death, when animal die, his body is useful after death. His skin, his bone, his flesh, everything is useful. But human body is useless after death. So whatever we can do in the service of Krishna, that is to our credit. So while we are living, we should keep on serving Krishna. We should not give up serving Krishna. If someone is not serving Krishna, this is his misfortune. It's not good for him. So I felt so dedicated, not caring for his body, just thinking of others. It doesn't take him rest. So I was really moved. I was moved by his compassion for others.
Then the next day he came in, and it was the evening time, and he asked that the devotees, he started this 2/4 beat, this sound that we'd never heard before, and it's Srimad Bhagavad Gita class in the evening, and he starts with the cartels, with his eyes closed. Parama Karuna Pahundvijan Nitai Gaura Chandra. His eyes being closed. There was maybe only Dear Krishna and maybe one or two devotees out of all of us that even knew the song. All the rest of us were all dumbfounded, all waiting to, have this concert from Srila Prabhupada, And Prabhupada kind of comes out of his samadhi, and he looks around and he goes, what? You don't know this song? Tomorrow you will know this song. And he went right, put the cartels down, and got right to the class and went right on, So we're all feeling a little strange about that. And the next day, of course, Balavanta, who was in charge, and Rupa, they were the head men there in those days there, And we all had Xerox copies of the song for the next day, and so Prabhupada comes back out again, and he's Padma Karuna, and we're singing along with him. But only the first stanza, and then Prabhupada stops, because Paramahansa Swami at the time, who was the one in front there, was playing the mridanga. He had no idea how to play this mridanga, because it was this 2/4 beat. It was different altogether. So he says, give me the mridanga. And being Satsarup's man, he nudges me and whispers to me, he says, wow, this is the first time Prabhupada's played a mridanga in years. So not only is it a spectacular moment in life, but it's also now a special moment, an exclusive special, that Prabhupada's going to play the mridanga, So he gets this mridanga, and in Atlanta it was very humid there. So the mridangas had this plap, plap, bang, bang sound. They were horrible. They had no tone, no nothing, And so he's like, what's this, like that with this mridanga. Well, Dear Krishna goes off, and he comes back with a Satish Chand mridanga, 1 of 5 that was only made of that quality. And he comes in the room, walking it, through the devotees, and brings it up to Srila Prabhupada. And it too had a little flap, flap, bang, bang sound to it, because of the humidity. Well, this was the first miracle that was performed in front of all of us. And he put that mridanga in his lap, and he goes bong, and he goes bang, bong, 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 bong. Just by the tapping of his hand, Sri Mridangam came into tune. Bang, bang, bing, 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 bong. And then he starts to do this again, Padma Karuna, boom, boom, Pahundri Jan. And of course, he's our hero, and he's just conquered the mridanga, and that was, and he had that look on his face too, that he had figured it all out, and everyone's just roaring, that, Prabhupada's so victorious in everything he does. It's so cool,
Truthfully, nothing ever tasted like when she brought it from her own home. And I think it's because she made everything in mustard oil. But the taste was exquisite. And Prabhupada did say that if you want to eat for taste, you eat with mustard oil. If you want to eat for health, you eat with ghee. And the things that came from Pishima's hands that she brought from her home, we could never duplicate.
So we had gone from Vancouver to all the towns between Vancouver and Edmonton, and we had spent most of our time in Calgary and Edmonton, and we had amazing response because no one knew what the Hare Krishna movement was. We were on TV, we were on radio, we were just young devotees, 19, 20 years old, very enthusiastic. And there was a large Hindu community, and we did programs with the Hindus. We were staying in 2 people's homes. We were doing Sunday feasts in their homes, getting 50, 60 people. Devotees were joining there. Ganapati Maharaj, we first met him there, and other devotees. So it was a phenomenal program, plus we were distributing Krishna books. So I wrote a letter to the devotees in Vancouver describing all the events. It was such an ecstatic Sankirtan party. And then the devotees took that letter and they sent it to Prabhupada. And actually I sent that letter to my wife, and I had a wart on my foot, which I'd had since I was 13. So at that time I was about 21. So she sent the letter to Prabhupada, and then she also asked him, do you have a cure for warts? Because at that time, devotees had that relationship where they were dependent on Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was in the pharmaceutical business. So a lot of times he would give us cures, and then we would also ask him for cures. So I had this wart since I was 13, and it was cut out many, many times, burned out, it would continually grow back. I just forgot about it. When I came back from that trip, the wart had gone. I thought, oh, this is, somehow or other it's gone. And then she later told me, said, when I sent that letter to Prabhupada, I asked him for a cure for warts. And somehow or other, this is a true story, somehow or other that wart disappeared. Whether it was by chance or Prabhupada did it, that we can try to understand. But I took it that somehow or other Prabhupada did that. So that was an interesting pastime.
And it never came back.
Never came back.
Prabhupada decided that he liked the beach better than all the other parks. So I began to take Prabhupada to this one beach every day. And we didn't actually go on the sand, but we would walk up and down a road that was next to the beach. And a number of things happened on those walks. Again, Prabhupada was talking about the scientists not having gone to the moon. And on one morning walk, he was talking about that, and he pointed to the sand hills. There were some big sand dunes right next to the road. And Prabhupada pointed to the sand hills, and we could see that on the sand dunes there were some very small flowers growing. And also, if you looked closely, occasionally you would see a lizard going underneath those small flowers, very low to the ground. And Prabhupada made the point that even in sand, life can exist. So they say they've been to the moon. Prabhupada said they said that they've been to the moon, and it's just full of dust and sand. But he said, here we have experience that life can exist. Therefore, we must say that they have not been to the moon, because there must be some life form there. And Prabhupada at the same time also said that even if one lives in a desert, he can grow these two things, watermelons and potatoes, in sand, and he can survive. So in that way, Prabhupada said, there is life throughout the universe, and in every condition there are living entities. So that was one reason Prabhupada gave.
Another incident in Vrindavan, that there was one Prabhupada's god brother. He was also from Bengal, and he will come and massage Prabhupada. Prabhupada was a very exalted god brother of his, so he was massaging him. Then a devotee saw that he massaged Prabhupada, so devotees also started respecting him. So then he started working kitchen, deity kitchen, this god brother of Prabhupada. And he started cooking for the deities. And what he started doing, he started stealing also some sugar and some ghee, will take with him, steal. So then devotee won't tell him because he's Prabhupada's god brother, respectable, their uncle. So one day report came to Prabhupada that his god brother is stealing. Prabhupada said, why you didn't tell me before? He said, Prabhupada, we thought that he's your god brother. He said, god brother means he can steal from Krishna? Kick him out, he's not fit to be here. So I couldn't believe. So Prabhupada, it's not that he's showing some favoritism to one person and no, law is law for everyone. Then this god brother of Prabhupada was kicked out.
So the cooking early on, she was cooking, she used a lot of, so she wasn't using the mustard oil, but she would use a lot of mustard seeds and grind them to a paste, and that would bring out a flavor of mustard. So after maybe 2 weeks of this, Prabhupada he started swelling. He was complaining to me, don't let her make this, don't let her make that. And then I was trying to taper her off. Pishma, you can't do this, Pishma, you can't. And so then about the third day, because at least if she didn't grind them, she started putting them, they were floating on everything. And the third day Prabhupada he looked at me and said, do not let her in the kitchen. Do not let her back in the kitchen. And I did not have the heart to tell her she couldn't come in the kitchen. I loved her dearly. And she adored Prabhupada. And so next morning when it was time to come in, there was Pishima, we came in, we'd sit down in a little circle. It was like a little ritual. We would begin, and a lot of it was eyes, body language, and feelings in the few little words that I would do. And she'd have her foot knife, and we'd begin, and she had a stone. We had to grind everything. Prabhupada wanted everything fresh. I would take an extra hour and a half in the morning and grind cumin, but at that time he was taking wet paste. It wasn't dry. I would grind with water, and I'd grind on the stone, silbata. And so I'd have all my katoris of ginger paste, chili paste, black pepper paste, and cumin, and right on down the line, mustard seeds, posta. And so we were grinding, and Pishma was getting her vegetables together, and she asked me for the sarson. In Bengali, it's mustard seeds. And I looked and I said, Pishma, Prabhupada bolo ne sarson. And she'd look at me and I'd say, and she had these big cow eyes, and she'd look at me, and I could hardly resist her. And so I went into my katori and I took one seed, and I looked and I said, Pishma, bus. And she looked at me. She couldn't believe I was being so cruel. But she took that, we started laughing, she was smiling. She took that one seed and threw a little water and began to grind. And if you know what the stone looks like, it has pits. you know, to grind. So I don't know where she got, and she was going like this, and she got it, and we were laughing. And somewhere or other she got something that she could put in there. But
And then there's a little bit of a class, or like in Sunday feast, and it happened to have been Sunday too. And he's giving this lecture. Well, there was this Christian woman there, and she kept interrupting Prabhupada, you know, saying, well, it says in the Bible that Jesus is the only way. And Prabhupada would say, yes, the teachings of Christ are the only way. One has to surrender to Guru. One has to follow these principles of religiosity, you know, like this. And was humoring her. Meanwhile, the devotees are just snarled up, waiting to just get the cue to just toss her out, because she's like really clogging the toilet, you know. And there was one Sikh person who called out and says, in our scriptures there's no mention of Krishna, but we worship Govinda, Gopal. And Prabhupada said, yes, that's good, we just worship Govinda, Gopal, that's fine, you know. And then this woman butted in again, probably for the third time. And Prabhupada interrupted her and says, have you seen Krishna? Have you seen God? Well, no, you know. Then why are you speaking? Don't speak anymore. And then, of course, all the devotees, Jai, yay, you know, now all waiting for her to say something, so they've got the cue now, you know. So they're waiting for him to say, you know, for her to say anything, because now she's being tossed, you know. Of course, she left at that point, but that was also very neat, because Prabhupada was caught in an awkward social situation. It's a Sunday feast, the place is packed not only with devotees, but with guests, news media, everybody's there, and here's this woman causing disturbance. And I was feeling for Prabhupada, how he was going to handle this, you know. And of course, the victory man as he is, you know, the personality he is, you know.
In the summer of '71, all the devotees from Vancouver went to the Rath Yatra in San Francisco, and Prabhupada was there as well. And because I was the temple president, I was told that in the evening there was going to be a temple president's meeting. And I had, to this point, I had never been alone, not alone, but I'd never been with Prabhupada in an intimate setting. I'd only seen him giving class. I don't think at this point I'd even been on a morning walk. So the whole day of Rath Yatra I was thinking, what is this temple president's meeting? Is it some type of managerial meeting where there's going to be policies and strategies, like a corporate meeting? And so I was wondering all day. And that was the basic impression I had of a managerial meeting, and Prabhupada's going to set some policies and standards, show us how to take care of our books, organize, and so forth. So it wasn't anything like that at all. When we got into the room, as we were coming in one by one, Prabhupada gave us some prasadam off his plate, some dried fruit and nuts. And then he sat us down, and then the whole time he preached to us about preaching and opening more centers, because the mood in those days was to open centers. Prabhupada wanted 108 centers to be opened. So even more than book distribution, I think at that time, opening centers was the focus. So he was preaching to us about opening centers. And the devotees were telling Prabhupada what they had done, and he was preaching to us about preaching, the importance of preaching and enthusing us and preaching to us. And that was the temple president's meeting, was Prabhupada preaching to us about preaching. And devotees telling Prabhupada about their preaching, and Prabhupada not talking about any details of the preaching other than, yes, open up more centers, preach, spread Krishna consciousness. So I thought that was very amazing. And then in my other experiences with Prabhupada, I was always interested in seeing how Prabhupada would manage, because we have to manage a society, and there are different styles of management. And I always wondered, how did Prabhupada manage the movement? You know, because generally you have the conception of a manager, especially of an international society, of someone with many secretaries, 3 or 4 telephones, big desks, so many things. So every time I was with Prabhupada, no management was going on. He was just preaching. Of course, I wasn't a GBC, but still, at least in my own experience with Prabhupada, there was never a time I was with him that he was rushing, as we may tend to do, on the phone, this emergency, that emergency. He had a totally different way of dealing with things, basically, as we know, through the mail. And every time I was with Prabhupada, he was either hearing about Krishna or preaching to devotees. And I would sit with him and I would think, how is Prabhupada managing this international society? Because every time I'm with him, he's always preaching. And he's not even talking about any of the problems, and he's not talking about management. And I was always just awestruck by the potency that Prabhupada had.
And then on another time, on a morning walk, we were discussing the fall down of devotees from Krishna consciousness. And it came into my mind, one of our godbrothers in Australia had left the movement at that time. So again, on this morning walk, I came up with a question, and I said to Prabhupada, well, Prabhupada, if devotees are transcendental, then, and again, Prabhupada cut me off in mid-sentence and said, not transcendental, trying to be transcendental. So that, again, was another eye-opener, that we're not immediately on the transcendental platform. We still have to struggle and prove ourselves in Krishna's eyes. So that was another funny thing on the morning walk.
And it's happening in Vrindavan, and there was one person, he also got initiated by Prabhupada. Then he was staying in Vrindavan, and he was locking the 2 rooms of guest house. What he was doing some business there. He will do business with the devotee, sell them things. So, and when Prabhupada is giving his darshan, he will speak in Hindi with Prabhupada, and devotee won't understand what he's talking about. So, and later on Prabhupada came to know that this guy is keeping 2 rooms and paying nothing, doing his business. Prabhupada was very furious. Prabhupada said, kick him out. This is not some business place, this is a temple. It's a guest house for the guests. So then this guy started giving some, explanations to Prabhupada. Prabhupada, was very furious with him. So then I mentioned to Prabhupada, I said, Prabhupada, I had this feeling from this person that he is not a good person, he's staying here. Then Prabhupada passed one very good comment. He said, look, this eagle fly very high in the sky, but his eyes are always down in the earth. Eagle eyes, looking where eagle can find some dead body, to eat. So same with this guy, got a good opportunity here to become Krishna conscious, but he's still doing his business, still looking down. See, he's so unfortunate. So then this person was kicked out of the temple. I was amazed, Prabhupada, concern of everything, and he wants everything should go well and standard should be maintained. It was so amazing.
And at that time, Prabhupada hadn't come out to darshan. I hadn't seen Prabhupada in 2 weeks, physically, and he hadn't eaten anything that you could count in the palm of your hand in that amount of time. And when I walked in, it was a bit of a shock. He didn't have his kurta on. He had a top piece, and he was sitting, and he had his knee up, and he has dhoti over his knee, so his knee was showing. And his collarbone was jutting out. He was so thin. And it immediately put me in a space when I saw him. And I went up, but I couldn't hear his voice. His voice was very weak. So I moved a little closer. Couldn't hear him. I had to come maybe 5 inches from his face to hear his voice. And I was right into his face. And he looked at me and he said, I have not eaten anything solid for 2 weeks. And I started to cry. The tears started to come down my face. And he saw that and he looked at me and he said, but I'm eating this Singara. And everybody roared. There was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, there was Bhakti Charu, and Upendra. Upendra was there. And everybody roared and said, Jai Prabhupada. And so then he said, but I'm eating the cigar. And I started to smile. And he looked at me and he said, so you can cook. And so I sat back and on my knee, I sat back from him. And he said, but, and he became a little stern. And he said, but, he said, you must shop, you must cook, and you must clean. And he said, and you must have no assistance. It was very firm. And then his voice softened and he said, is that all right? I smiled and I said, of course, Srila Prabhupada. And then he looked around at the men and he said, and no men are to be in the kitchen when she is there. And then he looked at Abhiram and he said, if you need assistance, your husband can do. And he left it like that.
When I was temple president in Vancouver, as I said, I was able to write Prabhupada. So at that time I was thinking we should form a rock band, because if we had a rock band, if we became famous, we would have influence over the young people. And I was imagining us playing and converting people to Krishna consciousness and making so much money at concerts that everyone who came to the concert would get a book. So I wrote Prabhupada a letter and I said, you know, these rock stars, they have influence over the way young people think. They can totally change the way people are thinking. So what if we start a rock band and try to become famous, and then we can preach through that? So Prabhupada wrote me a letter, interesting letter. He said, this trying to become famous is all phantasmagoria. He said, you'll never become famous. He said, this is totally impractical. Why even try for it? He said, we don't want to become famous ourselves. He said, we want to make Krishna famous. And he said, if you want to do music, then use your musical ability to lead ecstatic kirtans in the temple in Vancouver. But don't try to become famous yourself. So when I wrote Prabhupada, I was thinking, at least at that time, I wasn't thinking of wanting to become famous. I was thinking if we became famous, we could use that for preaching. But actually, before I was a devotee, I had a very strong desire to become famous as a musician. So actually, Prabhupada saw that. It was very clear that he saw that. I actually didn't realize that if that wasn't one of my motives, it certainly would have become my motive, or I would have been adversely influenced by it. So that was Prabhupada's reply. Knowing exactly where I was at, he said, don't try to become famous. You'll never become famous. We don't want to become famous. And so he shattered. So after that, I totally ever forgot that desire of becoming famous, which was actually quite a strong desire before I was a devotee. That was one of my aspirations.
Prabhupada was also describing on those morning walks during those times how thousands of years ago temples were built, although they didn't have huge cranes and different mechanisms to get things up on the top floor. He said that they would build one floor and then they would push sand all up around that entire floor so that you could actually walk up the whole floor, the whole building would be covered by sand. Then they would be able to traipse up the sand and then roll up the big pillars and the big stones and whatever else had to go on the second floor. Then they would cover that in sand again, and in this way they built the different levels for the different temples. That was one thing that Prabhupada described at that time.
On to the Sunday program, and where Prabhupada gave he was actually doing the puja for Bhaktisiddhanta. I'd like to also note that when Srila Prabhupada came in the room for the greeting of the deities that morning, they had Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada's Vyasasana established, and Pushkar's painting of him in the chair, sitting there, full size, you know. And Prabhupada always kept his head tilted and away in this mood as a child sitting in front of his father. That his mood was actually that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was there. His whole mood was being very humbled. I mean, he was humbled. He was like, you know, and only looking over to make sure everything was perfect and that there was no problems, you know. But not sitting there like it was a statue or a painting, but actually sitting there as if Prabhupada was actually there. That's my reference to Prabhupada's eternality, is that, you know, the way he treated his Guru Maharaj, even though it was in the form of a painting. And you know, he's chanting very nicely and everything. And then he gets off the Vyasasana to do the puja. Well, in the setting up of the puja for the conch shell, of which he offered 3 times, and there was no receptacle, there was no bowl for him. And the devotees, of course, are all chanting as loud as they can, you know, the Hare Krishna mantra at this particular time. And being Satsvarup's personal servant, I got to be right up front. So consequently, Srila Prabhupada was no farther than 2 feet away from me. In his full form, I'm standing right in front to his side as he's doing the artik, the puja. I'm watching everything about him. And when he got to the point where he was using the conch, and he's looking down and he sees that there's no bowl, well, in the roar of the kirtan, no one can hear his voice, but he looks over to the door that's on into the temple, and Rupa Nuga and Balavantra are over onto the side over there. And he looks at them and with his lips makes out the term, "I need a bowl." Like this, you know. Well, all of a sudden, these guys start roaring out, "Hari Bol! Hari Bol!" and got the whole room start chanting Hari Bol, you know. Well, Prabhupada looks at them, you know, and you could just see that the expression on his face, what do I have here to work with, you know. It was really a funny moment, you know. And so in order to be continuous and keep the flow going, there was a Tulsi Devi that was perched up there next to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, in this very haphazard, lazy, sloppily way almost, if you will, takes the conch water and just tosses the water. Well, being right there in front, I watched this water. And this water came out of that conch shell in a perfect stream and circled around Tulsi Devi, not even splashing her. I mean, this was 3 feet away and about 4 feet high. It was all the way at the top tier of the, you know, the Vyasasana as it laid out, you know. Probably just went like this and continued throwing this water. But this water is not splash. It's a perfect stream, Lanny. Miracle number 2. I'm overwhelmed by the reality of what I'm seeing. It's not really within the laws of physical nature here, you know. And I was just, wow, you know. But I think there was more of a romance at this point of Prabhupada, of who he was in regards to the leader of the movement, you know, the personality by whom I've been initiated by, but not convinced to the core of my heart that he's actually a pure soul, you know, in complete communication with Paramatma, the Lord Krishna, within his, you know, face to face. I don't think I really appreciate that this is a reality. I'm thinking, well, it sounds good, we should think like that, but I don't think so, you know. Well, when it came to the point where the conch shell was to be blown, it was a little conch shell. The hole for blowing was not properly made, and the Pujari later mentioned how, or earlier rather, mentioned how they grabbed the wrong conch shell. This won't work. You know, it hardly works for me. I'm a young boy, 20 years old. I can figure it out. But, you know. So when Prabhupada, and the whole room had a certain mood of like taking a breath and kind of waiting to hear them blow this conch shell, you know. And this is where my atheism came out. This is where I didn't believe. And I thought, well, this old man ain't going to be able to blow this conch shell. Well, Srila Prabhupada took this conch shell. And again, mind you, I'm right there. I mean, as the crowd's even pushing, and I'm leaning back to keep from his elbow, you know, bumping into him, you know, I'm this close. And so I go right to his chest to see him take this breath and try to blow this conch shell. He takes this conch shell and just puts it to his lips. There's no breath. He doesn't take a breath. He just, ooh, ooh, I mean, 3 times perfectly. Miracle number 3. At that point, I realized that he was a pure devotee outside the laws of nature. That was really the most amazing thing.
So, some morning walks, there is a picture that many devotees will remember where I'm standing behind Prabhupada, Hridayana Maharaj is there, Danavir Prabhu is there, many other senior devotees are there, and Prabhupada, and we're all laughing. Vikram Swami is there. Everybody's laughing, bursting out laughing. That shot is there in Your Ever Well Wisher. It's a still, and it was also published in BTG. So what were we all laughing about? So we were walking in Santa Monica, just north of the pier, and Rameshwar was describing book distribution in South America, how people were getting letters from people who had received books, who were appreciating books, who were living in places where there were no temples. So he was very impressed by that book distribution had gone so far and wide throughout South America that even people were getting books where there were no temples. So he was just glorifying Hridayana Maharaj. Just going on, just see Hridayana Maharaj's potency, he's enthusing book distribution, he's so wonderful. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was, I believe, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was there. And as we know, that was 1976, that was the height of the competition with Radha Damodar and the other temples. The Prabhupada had incited this very fierce competition, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj wanted to be number 1, and Prabhupada knew that he wanted to be number 1. So, as Rameshwar was going on glorifying Prabhupada, glorifying Hridayana Maharaj again and again and again, Prabhupada stopped and said, don't speak so loudly, Tamal will have a heart attack. And everyone just cracked up. And that's that picture. And Prabhupada himself was laughing.
After Prabhupada would eat, he wanted his remnants distributed. And he would ask me if I was distributing them daily. And truthfully, I really disliked this part of it because everybody was very fussy. And it would take me about a half an hour. I'd walk 2 floors of the building that he was staying in. And everybody would, I'd put everything on the plate and go around and, oh, give me this, give me that. No, I don't want that, give me that. And it was like this, and there was kind of even a rivalry and a fight, between some of the men that would want certain things. And every day it was a trip for me. And it would take me quite some time to go around, and people knew when probably finished, and they'd kind of wander out of their rooms, and everybody was in the halls waiting for this plate to go through. And one day, and so Prabhupada said to me, he said, you were distributing? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. And he said, I want you to mix everything. He said, mix. And I said, oh, okay. So that day when I went down, I didn't only mix, I took it and I kneaded it. I took everything, the shukta, the sweet rice, the raita, the dal, the sandesh, and I would go like this and just mix it like I was doing dough. And I want to tell you something, nobody wanted it. Nobody. I walked the halls, and after 2 or 3 days, not a soul was out. Nobody was out. And when I would give them, it was like, oh, just a little bit. They would take this much. And I would go down, and I would eat the whole thing myself, because I couldn't distribute it. And every day I got this whole plate. And I'm telling you, it was the sweetest nectar. I loved it. It was just mixed, but it was so divine. And I was done in 2 minutes. I'd walk the halls, not a soul would be out. I'd go up to the next floor, not a soul would be out. And everybody knew before the time, and it was out of every room, there was somebody out the door. And I have to stop, talk, argue, this, give me that. And this took me 30 minutes to distribute his maha. And after a few days, there was not a soul to be seen. And I would come down, eat the whole thing. And after about 4 or 5 days, Prabhupada looked at me during lunch, and he said, so, you are mixing? I said, yes, Prabhupada, this is a very good system. I said, I am mixing. I said, it's very good. And he shook his head like that. I was terrible, but it was truly delicious. It was truly delicious, and I ended up getting the mercy because nobody wanted it. And I relished that very much.
But this one time, I guess it must have been in the evening, this one psychology student came to see Srila Prabhupada. So the man came in and he sat down opposite Srila Prabhupada and was introduced, and Prabhupada had his bead bag on his hand, and Prabhupada sat there and was looking at the man, and the man had glasses on and his head was kind of down like this, and I can't remember whether he was actually looking at Srila Prabhupada through his glasses or whether he was just looking down at the floor. But it was strange. It was a strange experience. And so Prabhupada looked at Amoga, who was sitting in front onto the side, the right side of Srila Prabhupada, and motioned with his head like that. So Amoga said, Srila Prabhupada would like to know if you have any questions. And the man didn't respond. He just kept on looking down with a just complete deadpan face with his glasses on. He just sat there. And I began to feel very uneasy because this was my first very intimate association with Srila Prabhupada, living with Prabhupada. I was very afraid of doing the wrong thing, and I was very uneasy in silence. So and there was a lot of silence in the room at this time. So then Prabhupada's hand began to move, and he began to mouth the mantra, although it was, again, practically inaudible. And all I could hear coming from Prabhupada's mouth was Ram, Ram, Ram. I couldn't even hear the Krishnas, but I managed to hear the Rams, and Prabhupada's hand was moving in his bed, and he was looking at this man, just looking at him. So then obviously nothing was going to go on. So Srila Prabhupada quoted from the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. I can't remember the text. Actually, I believe it was Bhumi Rapo Nalobayo Kam Mano Buddhi Evachar, I think 7.4 in the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada began to describe the different elements, and he came to the element of the mind, and he began to explain how mind, intelligence, and ego, these are all subtle things. And carrying on from that, basically Prabhupada was speaking to all of us in the room, but he was looking at the man. Following on from the mind, Prabhupada began to speak about ghosts. And that was a little strange, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. But Sruti, who was up on Prabhupada's left on the end of the table, we were all sitting on the floor, Prabhupada was on a mattress, Sruti began to smile and he chuckled a little bit. And he interrupted Prabhupada. He said, "Prabhupada, why are you talking about ghosts?" And I was really taken aback when he asked that question. I thought it was being too familiar, but of course he had a familiar relationship with Prabhupada, and I didn't know anything about Srila Prabhupada. He was able to have that rasa with Prabhupada. I didn't consider it offensive at all, but he laughed and he said, "Prabhupada, why are you talking about ghosts?" And Prabhupada ignored the question and just continued looking at the man. And he began to describe how ghosts are subtle things and how they don't have bodies and how it's a very sinful body, that one still has material desires but cannot fulfill them through a gross body. And then Prabhupada, at one point, as he was speaking, and he said, and sometimes the ghosts, because they're powerful, they have mind over matter, sometimes they move things. And Prabhupada got his hand and went like that through the air. I remember that. And it was as though you could see a glass moving through the air by Prabhupada's hand. And we began to realize, as Prabhupada spoke more, that this man was actually ghostly haunted. Here he was studying psychology, the science of the mind, but somehow or other this man's mind was overtaken. So I got up enough courage during that speech of Srila Prabhupada to ask a question that came into my mind at the time, and I asked Prabhupada, well, Prabhupada, if the ghost overtakes the person, does that mean that there are two souls in the body? Does that mean that the ghost's soul enters the body and that there are two souls moving around in the body? And Prabhupada said no. He doesn't go in the body, but he exerts his influence over the body. But he doesn't actually enter this, so there are not two souls managing the body. So that was an unusual experience.
On another morning walk, this was on Venice Beach, right around the area where we have Rath Yatra. And I think Dr. Stilson Judah was on that morning walk, and Bahulaswa was presenting Krishnan arguments. So he said, Srila Prabhupada, one of the arguments is that no one has seen God. Something says in the Bible, I believe, no one has seen God. Something to that effect. And Prabhupada stopped and he said, no fool has seen God. He said, I am not a fool like you. I have seen God.
And then the morning walk, that morning, perhaps the next morning, we're on a morning, my only walk that I'd ever got a chance to be on, and because of being with Satsvarup, I think had a lot to do with it. And I remember I was directly behind Srila Prabhupada. I mean, you see his 3 wrinkles on his neck, you know, and the tilt of his head, you know, and the quickness of his cane, and his step, you know, I'm sure you've heard this, and it's been on all your tapes, I'm sure, a million times, but his gait, his walking, you know, was always appearing to be so smooth and soft and relatively slow for a gentleman of such an age, you would think. But that's how it looked. But when you actually got to the walking with him, you're finding yourself taking an extra quick step to stay up with him. He was actually walking really fast, which was really a surprise to me, because it just didn't look like that's what we were doing, but I found myself having to keep up. And of course, when Srila Prabhupada would stop to answer a question or comment, some philosophical point or something, you know, all the devotees, of course, want to hear. So I was always being pushed from behind into Prabhupada, you know, until everybody, you know, so they could listen to him, you know, speak, you know. And I found myself leaning backwards, you know, to hold back, running into Srila Prabhupada, you know. And at one point, some devotee who I don't know, and I wish I could remember, because it was because of him I got a direct instruction from Prabhupada. But it was some galoot type guy, some guy who was real big and tall and kind of goofy, And on a morning walk in Mayapur. I mean, in the days when you think that a person's initiated and that God made it all the way to India, that he at least knows the basic fundamental philosophical points of Krishna consciousness, like Krishna being blue and all these things. And this fellow, he says over my shoulder, you know, Srila Prabhupada, is Krishna really blue when nobody's around, you know? I mean, the whole walk, people were, well, actually, Srila Prabhupada immediately stopped, you know, and he turns around, and he's looking right at me, and with this look of disgust on his face, you know, angered, actually, you know, and I'm like, you know, standing there, his face is this far away, and I'm like trying to eyeball and vibe that it wasn't me talking, it was that guy, you know. But he turns and he looks at me and he goes, just read my books, like you idiot, you know? And then with this disgust, and then turns around and continues the walk. Right when he turns around to start walking, I stepped on the back of his shoe. One of my best days in life. First of all, I'm getting sauced as if I'm this galoot. And then on top of that, as he turns to start to walk, I give him a shoe flat, right? Well, there's Guru Creep and Chutananda and everybody. They're looking at me like they just want to kill me, you know. First of all, they all, because Prabhupada looked at me, everyone assumed, unless they actually were there close enough to relate to the fact that it wasn't me, thought it was me. So I'm just looked at and then stepped on Srila Prabhupada's shoe, you know, and, well, you can imagine.
I remember one morning walk in Vrindavan. We were going for a morning walk, and Prabhupada stopped and looked back. Said, "What is it? Get. He made note of devotees chanting. It was not proper. Chant properly."
So at another time in San Francisco, this was 1972, Prabhupada was had met another man, a scientist. And I wasn't at the darshan, but the next morning in class, Prabhupada was kind of joking about the darshan he had with this man. He said, last night I met an atheistic scientist and I called him a rascal. And Prabhupada was laughing. He said, I called him a rascal. And Prabhupada said, and he admitted it. And then Prabhupada said, I can do this. He said, but you cannot do this.
So then at this point, Tamal Krishna Maharaj had come in about the green card, and he came in with a card, and he said, Prabhupada, or he came in with a note he had written down from the phone. He said, Prabhupada, America is waiting for you. He said, the customs are ready, immigration is ready. He said, everything is cleared. And Prabhupada immediately began to cry. He said, I am so indebted to America. He said, America's given me so much. He said, he's given me men, money. He said, I am so indebted. And it was like, here it was about America, and he started to show this softness. And then Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, Prabhupada, you once said that you were like a cow, and you would go wherever your devotees would lead you and give. He said, but the one thing I don't see, I don't understand. He said, somehow or other you never dry up. He said, you're always giving. And Prabhupada looked and he smiled. He said, yes, that is because I'm Surabi cow. And we all started to laugh.
Another thing that I remember in Perth with Srila Prabhupada during that time, I was fortunate on this day because I was out doing Sankirtan, but the devotees told me when I came home later that it was Prabhupada's pastime and habit that after he would eat lunch, he would lay down for a short period of time and have his legs massaged at that time, perhaps for 20 minutes or half an hour at the most. So the devotees would take prasadam after Prabhupada had finished prasadam completely, and there was enough prasadam for them. And while Prabhupada was taking rest, they would take prasadam. And they would eat a lot. They were eating a lot at that time, I remember. I remember Paramahansa and Sruti were infatuated with the fact that there were such good quality milk products in Australia, and they really liked the yogurt, so they were eating a lot of yogurt at lunch and with sabjis and different things like that. And then, like Prabhupada, after they finished taking prasadam, they would also rest. So Prabhupada had gotten up from his nap, just after his lunch nap, and he walked out, and he couldn't find the devotees anywhere. I was on Sankirtan, and there was no noise in the house, and there was nobody around, so Prabhupada took it upon himself to go and look around the house, and he found all the devotees sleeping. And this was, actually Prabhupada had, I got something wrong there, Prabhupada had awoken from his nap and gone into his room to read or translate or do whatever. And about 2 hours later, Prabhupada realized he hadn't heard anything, and this was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So Prabhupada opened the door and he called, and there was no answer. So Prabhupada began to walk around the house looking for the devotees, and in the lounge room where the devotees were all taking rest at night, all the devotees who had overeaten were all sleeping about 2 hours after they'd taken lunch. So Prabhupada came, and I believe he actually either woken them up with his walking stick, something like that, and he severely chastised them for just eating and sleeping. And Prabhupada, the devotees told me at that time that Prabhupada had said that you're worse than karmis, because even the karmis right now are out there working hard for their maintenance and their food, and you're just eating and sleeping here. And he was very heavy with them, so I felt, thankful that I'd missed that, because I would have been one of them for sure. It was just fortunate for me that I was out collecting money for Prabhupada at the time.
I observed many things about Prabhupada that showed his, as I was saying, his transcendental ability to manage. In Los Angeles, and Prabhupada introduced the Srimad Bhagavatam class, where he would chant Jai Radha Madhava, and then we would chant the verse. And actually, he wanted us to learn the verses. He wanted us to learn how to pronounce Sanskrit. That's why he introduced that. He actually, when he first introduced it, I believe it was in maybe 1970, 71, he was teaching the devotees how to pronounce, and he was correcting them. So at that time, the program was that Prabhupada would chant Jai Radha Madhava, we would chant the verse, and he would let a lot of devotees chant, and he would give class. And after every class, he would have kirtan, without fail. Bhagavatam class, then kirtan. And in those days, when he would chant Jai Radha Madhava, all the devotees would get up and dance and jump in the air in ecstasy. It was a very ecstatic thing. And then he would have the class. And then he would have the kirtan. So the thing that I'd noticed is that Prabhupada always, every day, was always there. He never missed. And it was never like, today we're not having the kirtan because Prabhupada has an appointment, or he has to do this, he has to go to the doctor. So Prabhupada's, you continue the kirtan, Prabhupada's going to skip out. Or Prabhupada wanted to take the morning walk a little bit longer, so class will start later. And oftentimes on the morning walk, the devotees would say, we should turn back now, and Prabhupada would say, no, in a little while. It seemed like he just knew. He had the perfect timing, and then they would go a little longer, then he would turn, and it always like drive up to the temple, just perfect timing. He was very aware of the time, and he was always there. So I always noticed that we have the tendency to skip out on so many devotional programs, where we never saw that Prabhupada said, all right, today, you chant Jai Radha Madhava, and I'll come in, and I'll give the class, and you do the kirtan, I have to go. It's never like that, and it's such a perfect example that Prabhupada set, because Prabhupada knew we have that tendency, because we don't have attraction. So if he did that, we already do it anyway. What to speak of if he was doing it, it would be even worse. So he was very vigilant about that, and he was always on time, every day, day after day after day. So that made an impression upon me. Whenever I leave the kirtan early, I always feel guilty, thinking, I shouldn't do this. Prabhupada never did it. He always stayed.
I remember that in Vrindavan, I was sitting in front of Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada was translating. Now Mangalarti started. He called me, he said, go and count how many devotees are in Mangalarti. See how much he's thinking of everything. Though he's translating, but he's concerned of other things also. So I went and counted the devotees. when I counted the devotees. Came back, told Prabhupada, Prabhupada, these many devotees are there. So go and call temple president. And call the temple president. Prabhupada asking, how many devotees are staying here? So he told this many. So very many devotees were not there. Prabhupada was very angry. He said, even I should go to Mangalarti. I am not going because I am doing very important work. Why everyone is not going to Mangalarti? My temples are not hotels. They are the place that to perform worship and sadhana bhakti. Everyone must go to Mangalarti. I was very angry. I remember when I was in Bombay with Prabhupada, there Prabhupada was told, the Prabhupada devotee don't come to Mangalarti. Everyone must come to Mangalarti. So then proposal was made to Prabhupada that one who doesn't attend the Mangalarti, he should fast. Prabhupada said yes. So then one paper was written, Prabhupada signed that paper. So one who doesn't attend Mangalarti, he should fast. So Prabhupada was very, very, careful, and he wanted us to come to certain standard.
Then there was another time in Vrindavan, Mayapur, the Radha Madhava Mandir, actually, the Chaitanya, the Sri Chandradoya Mandir. And Prabhupada was just finishing his class, and at the time the Gurukulis, boys and girls, were all in the front from Prabhupada's Vyasasan. They were the first ones in the line, keeping that aisle for Prabhupada to look and see the deities. Well, I was the next kid, the next big kid, next to the children. And Prabhupada was coming out, and he was patting all, some of the kids' heads, So I bent my head down, like this, and hoping, and Prabhupada laughed, and he patted me on the head. Well, it's a procession. Prabhupada's on his way, en route to the Radha Madhava deities to go around the house there and ring the bell. And of course, after touching my head, I paid my obeisances. Well, when I got up, there was Brahmananda standing there with this serious look on his face, And I'm, oh God, what are you doing here? You should be en route, with everybody else. And in my thoughts, and he stood there and he goes, I've been waiting for Prabhupada to pat me on the head for 10 years. And still he hasn't done it. And then he walked, and he went on, So that was pretty cool. Yeah, that he'd stopped to make the point to tell me that, It was pretty neat.
In 1972, the devotees started doing karmiklos. And the main reason they did that was because they were getting kicked out of malls, and they thought if they wear regular dress, or say Western dress, if they wear Western dress, then they won't be noticed. So they found that by distributing books in Western dress, they were doing better. It was totally a byproduct. It wasn't a thought-out idea. So then, as we know, at that time there was a controversy that whether we should do this or we shouldn't do this. And a lot of devotees like myself who had never done this, who had been doing straight preaching, kind of resented it, although we did it. So there was a group of us, Nrsimha Chaitanya, Bir Krishna Maharaj, myself, and a few other devotees in San Diego, who during the 1973 marathon decided we would do it in dhotis and kurtas, and the women would do it in saris. And we felt that if we had the faith, if we had the purity, we would be successful. So we started getting very good results. And we were so ecstatic, and we thought, just see, you don't need to wear Western dress. That's all compromise. It's watered down preaching for weaker devotees who don't have faith. So we were so ecstatic, and we were feeling very proud that we were the pure ones. We became self-righteous. So we were very, very excited that we would write a letter to Prabhupada and tell him of our success. And we were thinking, actually, Prabhupada will, number one, he'll appreciate it, and number two, he'll tell all the other devotees, you don't have to wear Western dress. Just see, these devotees are doing just as well as you are, and they're wearing dhotis and kurtas and saris. So Prabhupada, knowing everything, being expert, he replied, he said, yes, if you cannot wear Western dress, if you do not feel comfortable in Western dress, then you can wear dhoti. So just like shatter this false pride we all had. Because you would think it'd be the other way. If you don't feel comfortable in a dhoti, you can wear Western dress. He said, no, if you don't feel comfortable in Western dress, I have no objection, you can wear a dhoti. So we were kind of flattened. Our egos were totally popped. So we see how Prabhupada, he just knew the mentality of the devotees. He was so expert. He just say the right thing to the right person.
Another time in Melbourne, I can't remember if it was the same time, but Prabhupada was performing initiations in the temple room at this time. And different people were coming up, and then one girl came up, and Prabhupada would ask Sruti or Paramahansa Swami, I believe, for the name. And Paramahansa would give the name. So one girl came up and he said, "So what is the name?" And they're already written down on paper. So they said, "Her name is Bhadrakali," Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada's eyes opened up. He said, "Bhadrakali, this will not do." And Prabhupada looked at it, and then he looked at the girl and he said, "So, your name is Bhadra." He didn't like the name Bhadrakali being given as one of his disciples' names. So she got the name Bhadra. And then I believe it was during the same initiation, some other girls came up, and then Prabhupada, to get their beads, and then Prabhupada asked them what are the four regulative principles, and he had the beads, and so he looked over to Paramahansa and said, "So, what is her name?" And Paramahansa would ask Madhudvisa, "What is her karmi name? What is her legal name?" so that they could get it on the list. So Paramahansa couldn't find it. Her name wasn't there. And so Paramahansa turned to Sruti and said, "Who's got it together here?" And then Sruti didn't know anything. Sruti turned to Madhudvisa and what's the girl's name? And then Madhudvisa turned to me. So I went down the line from Paramahansa, Sruti to Madhudvisa, and I was the closest person there. I think I was fanning Srila Prabhupada at the time. And he said, "Quick, think of 3 names." There were 3 girls whose names were on the list. So I just recalled a story from the Bhagavatam. I remember hearing Prasuti, Akuti, and Devahuti. So I told them these 3 names, and then they wrote those names down on the list, and they gave those names to Prabhupada, said, "So your name is Prasuti, your name is Devahuti, your name is Akuti." So Prabhupada empowered me to pick the names at that time. So that was another funny little thing.
In 1972, when Prabhupada was first introducing the whole idea of the scientists being rascals for propagating evolutionary theory based on Darwin, this was all new to us. We never heard Prabhupada speaking that way. So every morning Prabhupada was going out on the morning walk, and we were hearing from the devotees on the morning walk what he was saying. We didn't know what was going on. Why Prabhupada all of a sudden out of nowhere was smashing them. Of course, that's because Sri Damodar Maharaj was on the morning walks. So Karandar, who was the GBC, held in Nistagosi, or I believe during Bhagavatam class, he had to enlighten us according to his realization why Prabhupada was doing this. We didn't know why. He said, we all have faith in these scientists. And Prabhupada could see that we have that faith. And it's such a, it's such a detrimental theory for ourselves and for human civilization in general that Prabhupada had to be very, very strong. Otherwise, because of our sentiment, we would still be attached to these ideas we grew up with. So it was kind of a shock to all the devotees. Every day Prabhupada is smashing very heavily these scientists, and we were new devotees, we didn't know why, and that was his explanation, which was actually true, to build our faith in what he was teaching, because he would say, what are your choices? You believe in the scientists or you believe in the Vedas, so you have to decide. What is your authority? That's the only difference. And then Prabhupada would be very blatant, very bold. They're rascals, they're cheaters.
And then there was another happening in Mayapur. There was a Harinam contest. And this contest was going on, different groups were chanting, and they were giving them prize. And Prabhupada called me and said, "Look, Navi Yugandhar." I said, "Yes, Prabhupada. This Harinam contest is Nam Aprad." I said, "Is Prabhupada?" "Yes." "Yeah, it's Nam Aprad." So then I went told Bhavananda. So Bhavananda said, "This is Jayapataka who arranged, this Harinam contest, So then Bhavananda came to Prabhupada, I think. Prabhupada, this Harinam contest is Nam Aprad. Prabhupada said, "Yes, this is Nam Aprad." So then they immediately stopped the Harinam contest.
Prabhupada was giving a lecture, and the verse was about how Brahmins, women, children, elderly people are never offenders, that they should always be protected, they should always be forgiven. And that was the subject of the verse and the subject of the lecture. So during the class, children started crying. And this was children started crying just right after Prabhupada was making that point, that children are never offenders, Brahmins are never offenders, saintly persons are never offenders, women are never offenders. So the children started crying, and one devotee, Bahulasva, who was one of the leaders in the Berkeley temple there, took the opportunity as soon as Prabhupada paused to make an announcement. And Bahulasva sometimes was a little heavy and assertive. So he very strongly said, all the children should be taken out of class immediately, they're disturbing. Something like that. It was a heavy statement. It wasn't an empathetic statement. It was like, just get out of here, you're disturbing Prabhupada, in so many words. So immediately Prabhupada stopped. He said, no. He said, here in this assembly we only have women, we only have children, we only have saintly persons and Brahmins, so there are no offense, no one can make any offense. And just like it mellowed the atmosphere out, and Prabhupada was just warm. And so Bahulas was telling the mothers to take out the crying children, and Prabhupada was saying, no, there's no offense. There are only women, children, sadhus, Brahmins. There is no offense.
So this was in Bombay many years ago. I believe it was either 1974 or 1976, because the temple had not been built in Bombay, and I'm not sure what year it was built there, but it was the old temple, which was just stilts and a tin roof and the deities with the curtain in front of them. So Prabhupada was coming down and lecturing every night from Bhagavad Gita. After Sandhya Arti, we would have Sandhya Arti, then Prabhupada would come down, there would be a big kirtan, Prabhupada would sit there, give the lecture, and then Prabhupada was personally giving prasadam to everybody that was there. They would bring the Maha plate from the previous Arti, and Prabhupada would dip his hand in the prasadam, and people would hold their hands out, and Prabhupada would push it into their hands. It wasn't just a matter of dropping, but Prabhupada was actually pushing the prasadam into the hands. So everybody would get a little prasadam, and all of the devotees that were there, as well as myself, and all of the guests that were coming, we would all get a little Maha prasadam just from being touched by Prabhupada. So I was watching what was happening each night, and I wanted somehow or other to get to Prabhupada's feet. And I had noticed that each night somebody got to take Prabhupada's slippers or his shoes off when he came to the temple. And he would stand there, somebody would hold the slippers, Prabhupada would pull his feet out, one foot out, then he would take the other one, and then he would walk up and pay obeisances and then sit on the Dasa. So I got the idea in my head, I want to do that. I want to get close to Prabhupada's feet, I want to touch his shoes, and I want to actually touch Prabhupada's feet. So I made it a point one night to watch where Prabhupada's shoes were put. So they were slipped underneath, I think it was even underneath Prabhupada's Vyasasana. And I wasn't able to sit directly in front of Srila Prabhupada. I may have been even outside the temple, but I sat there guarding the shoes for the 45 minutes to the 1 hour. And I wanted to make sure nobody else came close to these shoes. I was going to do it, right? So Prabhupada gave the lecture and gave prasadam out to everybody, and then it was time, for Prabhupada to leave, and I had my hand, hovering above the shoes to make sure everybody knew I was getting the shoes, I was going to put them on Srila Prabhupada. So I grabbed them, Prabhupada came down, and I held one, and Prabhupada slipped his foot in it, and I was able to touch Prabhupada's feet. It was like just incredible. Prabhupada slipped his other foot into the shoe, and then Prabhupada walked off to a jeep. And in the evenings, Sridhar Swami, who was just a brahmachari at that time, so that may give you an idea of what year that was, he was driving the jeep and picking up Srila Prabhupada and taking Prabhupada from the temple, which was right up in the front of the property, and driving Prabhupada back to his room. So I saw Prabhupada approaching the jeep as he would each night, and I was following him. Because I'd put Prabhupada's shoes on, I was very close to Prabhupada, physically speaking. And all of the devotees came behind with the kirtan as Prabhupada got into the jeep. So I looked at the jeep, and the jeep looked very high. It was a four-wheel drive, and I noticed the step was quite high, and I thought, that's too high for Prabhupada. Prabhupada's going to have trouble getting in there. So as Prabhupada approached the jeep, I put my hand underneath Prabhupada's elbow as he was going to get into the car to help him into the jeep. And Prabhupada pushed my hand away. And I was kind of taken aback, you know. There I was becoming familiar. I'd put Prabhupada's shoes on, you know, I'd touched his feet. Now I felt I was a big-time guy, you know, I can help Prabhupada into the car. Prabhupada pushed my arm away, just as he had done when I got Gayatri initiation. So I got the realization at that time also that here I am thinking that my spiritual master needs my help. But actually he doesn't need our help in any way. He's giving us the opportunity to just serve him, and in that way offer that service back to the Parampara to Krishna. But actually Prabhupada doesn't need any help. Prabhupada is a yogi. He can travel through the universe at any time he likes. He doesn't manifest those things because he wants us to develop love of Krishna instead of some intoxication with mystic cities. But he was very simple, and we know there were definitely some mystical times when Srila Prabhupada did do something, but generally that was not his mood to display that.
It was in L.A. 1977 was the last time Srila Prabhupada was in L.A. And I guess he was there about a week or so. I can't really recall, but he was he had his own door at the L.A. temple. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but in L.A. there's an alleyway, and there's a side door that comes right down the steps from Prabhupada's apartment, which is above the deities there. And they would come in, and he would come down, open this door, step out onto the little patio area there that they have in the alley, and a car would be waiting, and he would take on his morning walk. Well, for some reason, again, you know, all the devotees are out in front, facing Prabhupada's door, you know, whereas I'm on the side of the little steps that he's coming down on the side. Well, when Srila Prabhupada opened the door, everybody, of course, Jai Srila Prabhupada, you know, and everybody, of course, pays their dandavats. Well, I didn't wait for the Jai Prabhupada part. I just went ahead and Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Sai Prabhupada and jump back up again, because I don't want to miss Prabhupada's form at all, ever, you know. And in all the different times I'd ever been around and seen him, I was always right up front and never looked at anything else really, except for a moment. Anyway, he comes out, you know, and as I was paying my obeisances, Prabhupada's coming down the stairs and he goes, Hare Krishna, in this real dark, deep voice, you know. And as I heard that, and as I'm coming up, I don't know, I didn't mean to, really. It just came out, but I mimicked him. And I went, Hare Krishna, because it sounds so cool, you know. And oh God, what have I done? I just sent myself to hell. I just made Guru Maha I didn't know what I was very, very scared, very freaked out. I thought that was it. I ruined my life, you know. Prabhupada would look over at me and say, get out, you know. Well, to my surprise, Prabhupada, you know, as I'm getting up and I said this, and I'm, you know, by this point, he's like standing in front of me, about to get in the car. And he looks over at me and he clenches his fist and he goes, Jai, like that. And then gets into the car. Yeah, with the fist and everything, you know. And I went, you know, holding my breath, having to change my clothes. You know, I mean, I was overwhelmed by what had just taken place, you know. But that was a certain sense of humor, I thought, that Prabhupada had, you know, because he appreciated that I wasn't being sarcastic, you know. It was just that it sounded so great. I just wanted to say it, you know.
Around 1972, there was sannyas fever. A lot of devotees wanted to take sannyas, and in those days, sannyas meant traveling and preaching, no management. And you were given a place to stay in every temple. And you were given all the maha plates. And all you had to do was preach and travel, and you'd get a servant. So now you know why everyone was asking Prabhupada to take sannyas. This form of renunciation was not really renunciation. So Prabhupada was getting letters left and right, you know, these frustrated householders, you know, having to work, maintain their families, and then they're looking at these sannyasis, traveling, getting all the maha, getting the prestige, have their own servant. They'd look at that and think, this is better than being married. So Prabhupada was getting letters left and right. So I also sent one sannyas letter, being frustrated in household life. And Prabhupada's secretary later told me that what the secretary would do is he would read the mail to Prabhupada, and then he would say, oh, Prabhupada, another sannyas letter, and Prabhupada would say, who? And then they would say the name, and then Prabhupada would say, yes, no. It was just like Prabhupada would know who was ready, who wasn't. So then Prabhupada would dictate to his secretary how to reply. So this devotee told me that when he mentioned my name, Prabhupada replied, tell him he's a nonsense. Not yes, not no. Tell him he's a nonsense. So anyway, Prabhupada wrote me back a letter, and he said, first thing is you have to become a responsible householder. He said it. The standard line, he said, you can preach in any situation. You don't need a danda to preach. And then his main point was that I don't want to give sannyas to anyone who's not proven themselves responsible in their ashram. Because Prabhupada didn't want to create an institution of irresponsible people, which was that was my mood. I can attest to that. This was a great life. You just travel and preach. Everything comes. And Prabhupada said, first, you become responsible as a grihastha. And then when you executed your responsibilities in the grihastha ashram, then we can consider sannyas. So Prabhupada would always give very down-to-earth practical advice to us young boys and girls. Most of us who joined in those days were hippies. We were just, out in the clouds. And I remember the GBC writing us letters telling us, we're not spaced out hippies anymore. We have to come down to earth, because that's how we would do things. We didn't know how to manage. We were like, Kesara, everything will happen. Totally irresponsible. And Prabhupada had to ground us, and it was so difficult for him to ground many of us. So that was an example of Prabhupada trying to ground me. And still I wrote another letter and I asked, 2 years later. And he said, all right, you can take Vanaprastha. And at that time I already had a child. So I guess I could be Vanaprastha. And my wife, of course, she flipped. And then, I was ready to just travel, and Prabhupada wrote her and said, no, I didn't mean that he just leaves and travels. And Prabhupada was just trying to encourage me. He said, Vanaprastha means basically you won't have any more children, which she didn't want any more anyway, but I took it as, all right, here are my walking papers. So that was another immature act on my part.
Prabhupada had one servant, guarding his room, upstairs Prabhupada's room. I was inside doing something for Prabhupada. And Prabhupada is pressing his buzzard. So I heard the buzzard inside. Prabhupada, you need anything? See, where is this rascal? I came out and he was not there. I said, Prabhupada, he is not there. So go and find out, where is he? So I came down, I saw him down walking, I said, Prabhupada is calling you. So we both came up. And when we came up, as soon as we entered Prabhupada's room, me and this devotee who was Prabhupada's guard and was not there. As soon as we entered Prabhupada's room, Prabhupada immediately said, where were you? In a very angry mood. And this devotee started shivering, like this. He was so scared. He couldn't utter a word. Just shivering. But then I was with him. I didn't do anything. I also started shivering. I felt, oh, my Guru Maharaj is angry. It's not good, It's not good to make pure devotee angry, Prabhupada started telling, you rascal, why you are not loyal to your duty? You're supposed to stay there. Why you are not there? But Prabhupada wanted to make sure that he should stay and guard the room. Anybody can walk in. It's not good. So Prabhupada, this devotee couldn't utter a word, and then he went back. So I felt, now Prabhupada is very angry. It's not good, that Prabhupada is angry. Then what happened that next moment, as soon as that devotee went out, and Prabhupada started talking to me in just a normal course of time, I couldn't believe. Just now Prabhupada was angry, but now it doesn't look like angry at all. I've seen one man, he was an old man, and a young devotee was giving him hard time. It was in Bombay also. It was in Bombay. So this young devotee and old man, they were arguing, And this old man was very angry at the young, and I happened to pass by. He said, Maharaj, he stopped me there. I said, yes. So he's breathing very heavily because he's so angry, he can't breathe even properly. I said, yes. He said, please wait. He said, this guy is giving me a hard time. He does this, he does that. I asked the devotees, why give him hard time? So then he started. The point I'm making is, when you get angry materially, then everything get disturbed. But I saw next moment Prabhupada was just completely normal. I couldn't believe. He's completely normal, He was not angry at all. So he was just making show of anger to rectify us, Once I saw Prabhupada, he was in a good mood. I said, Prabhupada, when you get angry on us, what we should do? And Prabhupada said, you should laugh. I said, Prabhupada, why? Why we should laugh? And he said that when spiritual master gets angry, it means Krishna is kind upon you. And he said that, in the material world, so many people are doing so many nonsense things. Anyone correct them? I said, Prabhupada, no one. When spiritual master is correcting, it means Krishna's mercy upon that soul. She exactly told me.
I was at Kumbh Mela with Prabhupada, and this was not Magh Mela, it was Kumbh Mela, which comes every so many years, and this one was another very special one that only came every 112 years. Or this one only, the Kumbh comes, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but every 112, but this one was extremely special, and that was, the arrangement of the stars was something in 1,000 years. It was a very significant Kumbh Mela, and they were expecting millions and millions and millions of people. And I came in again early to get everything going. This is on the banks of rivers. Everybody just, it's nothing there, but all of a sudden it becomes a city. And you set up tents, and we made mud stoves right on the banks, put a pipe in, and you have river water. It's running water. And this is in January, and it is so cold. We were in Allahabad. It was so cold. So cold. So cold that Prabhupada left because they had such a bad situation, but that's just something else of the story. And so we were going on for several days, and Prabhupada's tent was there, and the ladies had a tent and the men had a tent. Then they had big mud fires for the main cooking for distribution and for the devotees. And then over here by Prabhupada's tent, they had those aluminum siding, like that rippled stuff. And they had a little square box for him to shower. It didn't go down to the ground. You could see his knees. It came from about here up. And his kitchen was the same thing. They had this aluminum siding, but it had the mud stoves. But it was very windy, and you were on the banks of the river, so it was nothing but sand. It was the confluence of the Saraswati, the Yamuna, I think it's the Ganga. They come together. And I'm always of the type that I always want to be purified. I want the punya. I want to do what's right, and I want, to get liberation, and I want mukti, and I want to participate in Kumbh Mela. And so it was a certain day, a certain time that everybody was supposed to go bathe. It happened to be at around 11:40. It was 11:20 something that you were supposed to be in the water. And everybody from our camp left. Day. So everybody went except Prabhupada's servant, which was Harisari, getting a massage, and Prabhupada's cook. And everybody else got to go. But at that time, Palika and I were together. And so the three of us stayed back. And there was a part of me in my mind lamenting that I wanted to be in the water. I wanted to be there with that moment of purification, not knowing what I was having back at the camp, with Prabhupada in my service. And so, oddly enough, for about four days I was meditating on this one thing. Prabhupada would come every day out from his massage. He kept his routine no matter where he was. Timely, everything. The time was very important to him. And so he'd come out and he would go, in which my little tap, my sink was right 2 feet at the most from his shower stall. And then the mud stoves were another 2 feet from that. So I was at my tap every day somehow or other washing something, either a pot or vegetable, where Prabhupada would come, take off his shoes, his slippers, open the door and go into the shower. And every single day his foot would come out of that, his foot would go like that, looking for his shoe, because they were facing the opposite direction when he walked in. And he would have to turn them around with his feet before he had opened the door, and then he'd put his shoes on, open the door, and he'd walk out. And I was always right there, and I was watching. I was 1.5 feet from his legs when he was taking his shower. So for a few days I kept trying to work up this idea that I'm going to put his shoes on him. And I had been so mental about this for several days that I was a bit nervous. And so I thought, well, today I'm going to do it. And it was just at the time he came out, or so he went in. So I made sure I was there at the tap. Here it was. Everybody was gone. They were in the water. And I'm watching out of the corner of my eye for that foot to start going like that. And if I would have actually been more mindful, I would have just turned him around and just forgotten about it. But I wanted this act of putting his shoes on him. And so I saw the foot come out, and I immediately turned and I said, Prabhupada, I'll do it. He said, But because I'd been planning this for 3 days, I was so mental. I turned the shoes around, but then I thought they're wrong, so I went like that with my hands real quick, like scrambling something. And as I turned them so fast, he was already in the motion of stepping. So when he stepped on my arm, and he pinned me down to the ground. His foot landed like the middle of my palm to the middle of my forearm, so I couldn't bend, so it actually made me go down to the ground. He didn't get off. Like if you actually hit someone or touch someone, there's an automatic kind of, where you move back. He didn't move. And I was down on the ground, and I had to go further because my arm here, so it took my elbow down, so I had to go further to the ground. And he slowly, it seemed like eternity, he took all the weight that was in that leg and continued to press. And he put all his weight on that one leg, not saying a word, took his other foot, moved it around to move the shoe that I'd switched, and moved the shoe back, and then put his foot in that shoe, and then slowly like this, shifting his weight, went to the other foot, lifted his foot up, picked up the other shoe, opened the door, and then just walked out. Didn't say a word, but had his composure. And I was down, speaking of the fool, I was down waiting to get kicked in the head. I mean, that's what I was expecting when I thought, oh, you foolish woman. I'm down there, and he left all his weight, didn't jerk back, proceeded to shift his weight on my arm till he took the foot and moved it around, and then slowly shifted back, came back up, opened the door, and just walked like this golden light had just passed me by. And Palika, she was in shock what I had done. I didn't discuss this with her, what my mental state was. And she immediately ran over and took my arm, and she was doing my arm to her head. And then I sat and I thought, Sruti Rupa, you are so bad. Here you are wanting the mercy of Kumbh Mela. Here you are thinking this, and you're here, and the pure devotee has just stepped on you. And you're wondering and looking where the mercy is. It's hello. It's right here. And I was flying. I couldn't wait for the devotees to get back. I went around. I remember Guru Das was there. He was a sannyasi at the time. And he came back without, and I went running. said, "You're not going to believe." And I remember Abrahama's face was in shock that I was so expressive, and here I was through sannyasi, but I was just bubbling over, and he was enjoying it. We were talking, and I was telling him what happened, and he described another story to me, but it made me see where the real blessings were at home.
One evening, one morning, I was massaging him. I think day I came, I started massaging him. So he inquired from Brahmananda. I said, "Who's massaging me?" I said, "Navayugandhar Maharaj." So I'm feeling comfortable, feeling good. So when I came and I was told by Prabhupada's secretary that I should not touch Prabhupada's feet. Prabhupada said that no one should touch his feet. So I was massaging Prabhupada's legs. So then Prabhupada came to know that who's massaging him. Then he asked, "Why you're not massaging my feet?" I said, "Prabhupada, I'm told that no one should touch your feet." "Who told you not to touch my feet?" "You can touch my feet, not others." So I felt he's so merciful, so kind, so joyous, So then this devotee, he drove me away from Prabhupada, saying this, that Prabhupada wants us to go and preach, whereas it was not true. Prabhupada wanted us to stay there and serve him. Now I was going, so I asked Prabhupada's secretary that I'm leaving. So he said, "Did you have darshana, Prabhupada?" So I came to Prabhupada's room. So Prabhupada was lying down. A week later he left his body. So I said, "Prabhupada, your most fallen disciples of all is leaving." He opened up his eyes. And he knew that he's not going to meet me again. But I didn't know. I was thinking he's going to get well. And he lifted his hand, though he was very weak, and called me close. I went close to him and then placed his right hand on my head like this. I felt so great. And he smiled, That is my last meeting with Srila Prabhupada.
In 1976, I got the opportunity to travel with one of Prabhupada's secretaries who had just left his position as secretary, and he was telling me what it was like to be with Prabhupada. For those of us like myself who didn't have a lot of association with Prabhupada personally, we would envy people who were always with him. And Prabhupada would come into the temple with his entourage, he would go out with his entourage, he would have darshan with his entourage, and you were just an ordinary devotee. You never got to do that. Occasionally you'd get to go on a morning walk. So a lot of us would envy that position, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to take sannyas, then we could just have kind of free access to Prabhupada. So this devotee made a very interesting point, and he said that after being with Prabhupada so intimately, it became difficult to see him as Sakshat Hari, Tvena, like Krishna, to have that awe and veneration and respect, because he said Prabhupada would be very intimate with him. He would sometimes be up late at night typing letters for Prabhupada. Prabhupada would come in and just start talking about the Gaudiya Math, talking about his past family life, like that. He said one time Prabhupada came up and saw that the secretary was still awake. He said, "Oh, you have the same disease I have. You can't sleep, insomnia." And he said, "No, Prabhupada, you can't sleep because you're Krishna conscious." And then Prabhupada would tell him intimate things. He said, "Yes, this is very nice. I can't sleep. I can hardly eat now. No question of mating, no question of defending." He said, "I guess I'm liberated." He said, "I always wanted to give up eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Finally, Krishna would allow me." So we'd have these intimate exchanges with Prabhupada. And he said it was becoming increasingly harder and harder to see him that way, because often he would also have to take the position of mother. People would be in the room, "Prabhupada, you're tired, it's time to take rest." Like putting the son to sleep. And he had a very, very difficult time after he left Prabhupada's service because of that intimacy. It's not that he was offensive to Prabhupada, but he found it difficult to maintain awe and veneration. So then I began to appreciate my position that I didn't have that. In Prabhupada's books he says, there's a saying, it's better to see the deity and the spiritual master from a distance, because that way there's less chance of making offense. So those who want intimate association of their spiritual master have to be very careful. There may be a price you have to pay. So in that way I felt maybe my position was safer, that I didn't have the intimate association, but I had safe association. And many, many devotees who distributed books or had intimate service with Prabhupada in difficult situations would feel that my closeness with Prabhupada was through those situations. As I was saying, when I was in Vancouver and Prabhupada came in the dream, we felt very close. That's why we were there. That's why we were struggling. There was no other reason. We wouldn't have done it for ourselves. So I feel that's a good realization, especially for those who didn't have Prabhupada's personal association, who weren't devotees at that time.
So you became less envious of him at that point?
I became less envious. Actually, as a result of that, he had a lot of difficulty. And for some time, he left the association of devotees because he had difficulty in his relationship with Prabhupada because of that. And he told me the story that he was becoming so familiar and so overworked that he wasn't chanting his rounds. But he's very, very competent as a secretary, and Prabhupada was very attached to him. So he told Prabhupada that, I don't feel I'm making spiritual advancement, I can't chant nicely, or I don't always finish my rounds. Prabhupada said, no, better you stay. Better you stay. And the next morning in class, Prabhupada during class giving a lecture, Prabhupada looked right at him and he said, don't try to make spiritual advancement, just try to serve your spiritual master. So that was the idea, that he was doing wonderful service for Prabhupada. Prabhupada wanted that service, and he didn't have to try to make spiritual advancement because Prabhupada was basically saying, I'll maintain you. If you can't maintain yourself, I'll maintain you. And the interesting thing was that still the devotee found it difficult. He really wanted to leave. So finally Prabhupada blessed him. You could leave. He gave him a zone, GBC zone. And maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, he left. So even though he wasn't chanting his rounds in Prabhupada's association, Prabhupada was maintaining him. And when he left is when he fell down, not when he was with Prabhupada. So that's a very significant point. Don't try to make spiritual advancement, just try to serve your spiritual master. And your spiritual master will maintain you. Not that we don't try to follow and chant, but we can understand the principle.
Govinda